Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I am LaShawn Banks, Professor of Practice at UNC Keenan Flagler Business School. I teach markets, government, and sustainable growth, but I'm also a member of the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, and I work with the Ash Center for Democratic Governance at Harvard Kennedy School. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing a friend of mine and a former boss, Mayor Steve Goldsmith. And with that, Steve, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Well, I can make this sound really good if I'm going to introduce myself. Well, my most important accomplishment is I was your colleague at the Harvard Kennedy School, so we'll start with that. Just real briefly, I'm a longtime local government official, essentially. I was elected district attorney 3 terms in the county that includes Indianapolis. I was the mayor twice in Indianapolis. I chaired AmeriCorps under Presidents Bush and Obama for about a decade, managing director there. Deputy Mayor of New York of operations under Michael Bloomberg in the 3rd term. And I've concentrated throughout all that period on the intersection of public-private partnerships, technology, innovation, and government. And those are the subjects I now teach or work with mayors concerning at Harvard.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. So, my first question is this course is about the relationship between business and government. And as the mayor, can you speak to how important this relationship is and maybe provide a few examples of how you worked very closely with the private sector?
Well, I was a pro-business mayor. It doesn't mean that I didn't have my uh, differences with various businesses, but if your job as mayor is to grow the economy, by definition, you'd be working very closely with the private sector. And so I was trying to figure out a couple things. One, what we could do to help generally, and two, specifically how we could help in industry or a company. When I was early on in my 1st term as mayor, I did a little survey of small businesses in the city of Indianapolis. Indianapolis was a city of about 800,000, 11th to 12th biggest, depending on the time in the country. And so I surveyed local businesses, and I said, what are the 1 or 2 things that are keeping you from expanding? And the answers were essentially you, Goldsmith, and your local government, right? It's too much trouble to get a permit, too much trouble to get a license. We want to get environmental cleanup statements on some of the property. You're in the way, this and that, right? So it's kind of an eye opener. So we began to. I was thinking they're going to say tax rates or something, and basically they said regulatory policy and permitting policy. So we began an effort to make it easier to invest money, not easier to violate the rules, easier to comply with the rules, right? And so that's one set of things. And then you intersect government, local government, national government obviously has a heavy stick, but local government affects the environment for investment as well. Um, One more quick story. I don't want to take. I mean, I've been in local government for 30 years, so I have a story about everything. One quick story. So I was walking through a small manufacturer who made aircraft engine components, and they were complaining that they couldn't find enough qualified machinists. So I said, well, why don't you just hire them and train them? And that seemed pretty simple to me. If it's a business proposition, they have the business, they should hire the employees. To which they said, well, the problem with that is we hire them and we train them, and as soon as we complete the training, Rolls-Royce engines on the other side of town, and they just hire them. So all we are is the training first step on the ladder for better paying jobs, and we can't match their salaries. They're Rolls-Royce, and we're just a little guy. So I went to the local community college and said, what sort of certified training courses do you have for machinists? And I don't mean for people who are machinists, I mean for people who are looking for a better job and want to become a machinist. They said, well, we don't offer that. That's not consistent with what we're doing here. Right. So I essentially paid the community college to offer a 16-week training course in how to be machinist 101 or whatever the category was, machinist apprentice or whatever you need to do. The point of that story is there are gaps in the local economy where local policy can make a difference. And business can be the advocate for those changes. They can get together and say, look, we don't have enough coders in this community. You need a coding boot camp or a school. Or the mayor, through outreach, can learn those things and kind of help overcome those areas. And then finally, and we can talk about this later, you have the whole issue of workforce development, where there are many problems in way local economic development and workforce operate because it's so fragmented, and better exchange of ideas and thoughts and data among the sectors would make a big difference.
Excellent. And Steve, I love that answer because I'm also helping to host a conference here at the Keenan Institute on market-based solutions for reducing wealth inequality. And this is talking about how can the private sector be a part of the solution. So that was a perfect example. My next question, you talked a little bit about how you are into innovation, and I know that you run Data Smart Cities, and we talk a lot about innovation and using data to make better informed decisions. Can you speak to a few cities that are doing this and leveraging data to help them govern and grow?
Government is, even local government, there's a pretty substantial bureaucracy. But big companies become bureaucratic as well. So the question becomes, how to use data to do your day-to-day work better. And government often operates by routines, which is we're going to get a complaint, we're going to go pick up the trash, we're going to organize the trash routes, we're going to do essentially, we're going to create this kind of manufacturing system where we do the same stuff every day, routines. But you say to yourself, is it really the definition of performance that once you receive a complaint to your call center, called 311 in many places, that how fast you resolve a complaint is your standard for success? Or should it be how many complaints do you preempt in the first place? Like you identify the problem before it occurs. So data-driven innovation means, how do you bring the data together to identify causation? How do you bring the data together to preempt the problem from occurring in the first place? How to use the data even then, if it does occur, to more efficiently respond and resolve the issue. So the cities in the U.S. that are most effective with this are those that use the data to refine how they operate in order, and that means not just the person at the top of government, but it means the officials in government as well, measuring how well the public thinks they're doing, analyzing where folks are disgruntled based on kind of what the performance data is. So, long way of saying, every single service of government can be improved by using data better, and the systems that often are a problem, mobility management, workforce development, need a platform of data that crosses sectors in order to more effectively solve a problem.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This also goes to, I have my students read We Don't Make Widgets, that talks about the inefficiencies in government and how we can actually look at it as a business.
Right.
So, Steve, one of the innovations I love you did some time ago when you were mayor at Indianapolis. And this speaks to innovative thinking and leadership. And this is specifically around the city budget. Can you talk about this example of how you completely revamped the city budget to make it more effective and more efficient?
Most city budgets have very little to do with performance, right? The legislative body, the city council, allocates dollars each year. You get the same amount of dollars, plus or minus 5%, and you do the same sort of things. But inside of every agency, there's a range of activities that occur. And so I read this not Kennedy School case. I ran this business school case when I wanted to be mayor on activity-based costing by a leading fellow named Robert Kaplan. And basically it said, if you organize your budget around activities and you figure out how much it costs to do an activity, then you'll be able to figure out whether you can do that activity less expensively, or whether you need more of that activity, or whether that activity is producing performance. So we did that. We used outside consultants, and we did that and massively changed our budget. But let me give you one quick story, another story. This is a really good story. I love this story. So Um, I went down to visit we gave an award each month for the person who disclosed the most waste in city government. So if you can identify something we're doing really badly, I'll give you an award. And so we gave an award to this guy because he wrote in from the Public Works Department and said, you need to eliminate my job, which was like first guy who's ever said that. I went down there and said, well, this is very unusual. Why did you say this? And he said, look, um, my job is to buy training tapes and train employees in this department. No, my job is to videotape people in the department and train them. Sorry. And then he said, once we started doing activity-based costing, I realized I could buy the training tapes less expensively than I could actually make the training tapes. So I want to get out of the business of making these tapes because it doesn't make any sense. Right. So in other words, once he saw activity-based costing, he realized his cost of production was higher than the private sector. So once you do that, it opens up a world of good. And then the other thing in the Indianapolis model that really was even maybe more important was the following, which your class I think would appreciate. What is the right relationship between the public sector and the private sector? So you don't want the public sector to be procuring the same thing day after day. What you want the public sector to be doing is procuring innovation. So you say to the public sector, to the private sector, how could I do X more effectively? Not sell me the same amount of asphalt every year, but how can I make streets smoother? And what would the cost be? And so that process of inviting innovation and then negotiating the costs thereafter and the performance measures thereafter is one that drives innovation deep into the enterprise. And we did 80 public-private partnerships and competed 80 different public services. And every time we did it, we got the innovation of the private sector injected into government.
That is excellent. Thank you for that. Well, my last two questions, Steve, are now going to pivot towards leadership. So these are challenging times that we're in, but if you look at throughout history, there's always been challenges, and leadership is necessary whether you're a public official or a business owner. Can you speak to what separates good and bad leaders and what's required to be an effective leader?
It is a difficult and confusing time. Um, let me first start with what you know from your business school background, which is that leadership is not positional, right? It's not leadership. All the leadership in a city doesn't reside in the mayor. All the leadership in a company doesn't reside in the CEO. Leadership can be throughout the organization. I have a little case about that I want to mention at the end of my comment. So for me, public leadership is about defining what your goal is. Let's call it public value. Like my goal is to create more public value. A CEO in business can say my goal is state and shareholder value, but in government it's a little more different. We'll call it public value. So that you're always leading towards an end of public value. Because if you're leading for your own self-aggrandizement, right? You're leading only for your own political goals. And obviously everybody takes in consideration of political goals, but what are you leading for? Okay, that's one thing. So make sure you're leading for the right reason. The second is to create an environment where those who work for you are comfortable innovating. Mike Bloomberg did this in New York City. He said, go forth and innovate. And if you do it in good faith, I'll protect you from your own mistakes. If not, that's your problem. But if it's in good faith, I'll protect you, right? So he created an environment where people were comfortable making new efforts and taking new approaches. So leadership to me is one, and the leader is a person who tries to hire the smartest people that they can, who share their values, and then create that environment for them. So those are the aspects of leadership that matter to me. I was always focused on leadership and innovation. Not every leader needs to be focused on innovation, but creating the environment for an innovative enterprise, I viewed as a standard of leadership.
Excellent. Thank you. And can you tell us that case that you wrote?
Oh, so I taught a case when I first came to Harvard about New York, about Boston and juvenile homicides. which were very high at the time in Boston. And there was a deputy supervisor in the probation department, like not the mayor, not the police chief, not the district attorney, not the probation chief, but the deputy chief in the department. And that person realized that they were accomplishing very little. They go around and knock on the doors of probationers and accomplish very little. And he said, "Well, if we went door to door with the police department, knocked on the doors, that people would have to answer the doors because the police were there as well. And they could make the case about, well, is your son home because it's after curfew and he's on probation? Uh, or does he have a gun or whatever?" And so the fact that the result of that idea, right? He was leading from a mid-level position, led with a great idea that transformed juvenile violence in Boston because these two-person teams had the authority of the police department and the finesse of the probation department, right? So it was both. And so I just use the story because it's not a grand presidential level innovation, right? It's a sort of thing that anybody committed can do in their position. They can lead for change.
That is great. Thanks, Steve. Okay, and the very last question, which is my favorite. So, is no secret that Steve, you are a Republican, and that's how you've always governed, and I'm a Democrat. But when I interviewed to come up and work with you at Innovations in Government at the Ash Center, you selected me out of a number of candidates. And you and I worked so well together. And I really do believe that we moved the needle some with the chiefs of staffs and the different communities of practice we work with. So, can you speak to what it takes and what it means to work across party lines or with differing maybe beliefs, or especially different lived experiences, you as a white male, me as a Black female? Talk about how we work so well together.
We did. I appreciate your story. I was lucky to have secured your talents for our center at Harvard. There's lots of ways to answer your question. At one level, you're an easy case because you're talented, and so it does. If you recognize talent, then you want to secure talent. Inside your question, though, are a number of other challenges, which is often folks don't understand talent in that resides in somebody that doesn't look or talk like them, right? So how do you identify talent where your filter is you, right? And so I think that takes some refining to do. I mean, I don't want to get into the current DEI arguments, obviously, since there's such a flashpoint, but there's another side of this, which is to say there's a lot of unrecognized talent that needs an opportunity to prove themselves, right? And so I think if you start with that, and now I was also fortunate that I was a mayor, which means I had a lot of time working in very diverse communities, which was very educational for me. I could see the lives of folks in these different communities. I could experience things through their voices, which I think made me a little bit more aware. So one thing's contextual. Make sure you're not using your own context to filter out others. The second is to say, look, in this job, here are the values that are important for this job. And political extremism is not relevant to this job, right? This is a job about operational excellence inside a city using public-private partnerships. So I think if you figure out what's outside the rules, right, that you don't need to explore and you don't really want to encourage, and you look at identifying inside that commitment to professionalism, hard work, ability to articulate the message and the like, you can get there. So I think this is a really important issue because, well, I'll leave you this final story, which is not related to you, but it's not entirely unrelated either. I got elected mayor, and my predecessor had a set aside for minority-based and women-based enterprise contract. It had to be 15% of every city contract. Well, I got elected. I eliminated it. And I said, look, you guys have made 15% the ceiling, not the floor. and you're doing it by quotas, not by hard work. So let's start again. I want you to get to twice as high a percentage by examining what we're putting in the way of opportunity. What are our bid bonds? What are our performance bonds? What are the size of our contracts? What are we requiring of the contractors? So I know it's unrelated to your question, but it does to me say what we should do when we're trying to work across the parties is to remove the obstacles that prevent people from being their best and then help lift them up with equal opportunity, and then you can get there. So for me, we were lucky to have you and your different lived experiences as part of our center.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, Steve, is there any parting words you would like to leave students or even future leaders with about leading in sometimes challenging times?
Well, I think that one thing to remember, right, is that your students are business students, so they'll have a need to lead inside their organizations. But as they become successful inside their organizations, they will develop and accumulate influence outside their organizations, right? As they move up inside the corporate bureaucracy. And that means that they'll have an opportunity to influence the quality of their city, whether they're advocating for different policies or they're working at a local church or little league, they'll have an opportunity to make a difference. So I think it's important to identify leadership inside the organization and leadership outside the organization and to exercise both.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Steve.